From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The effort to redraw Alabama's congressional district lines got underway this week. As we reported last week, Governor Hovey has called a special session of the legislature to begin July 17th. That will give lawmakers just enough time to pass a new updated map to comply with the federal judge's deadline of July 21st. This week, the Joint Legislative Committee on Reapportionment met for its first public hearing in this process. Lawmakers heard from more than a dozen members of the public, from organized groups to just concerned citizens. That included Evan Milligan, the Montgomery native whose lawsuit led to the overturning of Alabama's current congressional map. According to committee co-chairman Chris Pringle, more than 100 new plans have already been submitted to the committee.
The governor has called a special extraordinary session for July 17th to start. After that session, the plan will be presented to the federal court in Birmingham on August the 14th. And then we'll have a hearing in Birmingham when the court schedules it. But this is just one of many steps that we have to go through on this process. We ask you to please review those guidelines. Since today is just a public hearing, we're not going to adopt anything, but we do want to we want you to read the guidelines, review them, and we'll discuss them and we'll vote on them to the next meeting. So that gives you plenty of time to look at them.
I guess there will be some sort of procedure that we'll adopt if we're offering amendments to these guidelines.
We're going to have a meeting to discuss them, yes, sir, in the next meeting.
It would seem to me that it would be important for us to try to change the procedure, considering the initial procedure got us in a little bit of hot water. So maybe over the course of the next couple of weeks, we could take a look at these guidelines and see if there's some things that need to be tweaked so we can avoid ending up back in court for doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
We are, as one of the members just indicated, our case was the one that the Supreme Court ruled on in terms of hearing our argument about the opportunity districts here in the state of Alabama. The three judge district court panel held unanimously that there was evidence of racial polarization in voting here, to a degree that without opportunity districts for black voters in the state, you wouldn't have an additional, you wouldn't have black voters here in Alabama outside of District 7 able to elect a candidate of their choice. That ruling, that was from the lower district panel, and when the Supreme Court ruled on June 8th in our favor, they affirmed that lower court's ruling. The map that we're presenting to this body is one that features 2 opportunity districts. It addresses other issues with the with HB1, with which the map that we filed the lawsuit against, particularly in regards to cracking the voting strength of black voters in the black belt.
Let's take another look at those maps. This is Alabama's current congressional district map, passed back in 2021. While it has been tweaked over the years, this map has looked about the same for the last 20 years. The Supreme Court upheld a lower court's ruling that the map dilutes black voting power by packing black voters into the 7th congressional district in violation of the Voting Rights Act. This is the map proposed by the plaintiffs in the case that successfully challenged the current district. See how the 2nd congressional district changes dramatically, extending all the way over to the state's western border. The 1st district also changes, extending all the way into the Wiregrass on the eastern edge of the state. Under this plan, Alabama would have 2 majority black districts, the 7th at 55% black and the 2nd at just over 50% black. Other notable changes are in the 4th district, which would extend into the Shoals area, and the 6th district, which would pick up Autauga and Elmore counties. But there are other maps being proposed. This one is from State Senators Bobby Singleton and Rodger Smitherman, the top-ranking Democrats in the Alabama Senate. It's one of 3 similar plans they submitted. Under this proposal, all counties would remain whole inside their congressional district. but there would be no majority black districts. Instead, the 6th district would go to about 43% black, and the 7th district would go to about 49% black. The reason those numbers matter so much is, as the Supreme Court noted, Alabama has a history of extreme voter polarization along racial lines. That's why some are arguing that even a black population in the 40s might not result in a black candidate getting elected in that district. We'll continue to follow this issue with the next hearing of the Reapportionment Committee happening on Thursday, July 13th. Also happening in the State House this week was a meeting of the Joint Committee on Prison Oversight. Because the Reapportionment Committee was happening at the same time and the two panels share several members, there was no quorum. But that didn't stop the members who were present from getting the latest report on Alabama's prison situation. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith has that story.
For years, Alabama's Department of Corrections has been plagued with multiple problems. The inability to attract enough corrections officers is one.
I would just say that is, I think, one of our primary concerns from a legislative point of view, as I think you stated earlier as well.
In his report to the Prison Oversight Committee, Corrections Commissioner John Hamm shared the new salary range increases are yielding positive results.
Right now, 61 correctional officer trainees scheduled to start the academy July the 10th. We do hold out that we might be able to add a few more to those before July 10th. But we also have 821 COT, correctional officer trainee, candidates in our applicant tracking system. We've had over 1,000 in there since we announced the pay raise. And we also, on top of that, have 350 applications for the correctional security guard.
He also noted that the pay increases have resulted in former corrections officers coming back to DOC. So far, they've hired 25. Another issue is the overcrowded, old, and dilapidated prisons. Construction has started on the first of 2 new men's facilities, but not without a share of concerns from lawmakers and the general public. They want to know, is work truly being done at the site?
So the thing on the left side of the screen, what that is pipe, that storm pipe that's being installed. However, if you had come back to this point, probably a couple of hours later, what you would see is dirt. And it's like nobody's been there and nobody's done anything. And that's typical for this type construction, and based on the jobs that I've done, the work is being done, but most of it is covered up within a day or so when it's actually laid.
And they also want to know the final cost.
Because you hear all kind of rumors and all kind of stuff going around about the price tag is now up to $1 billion. What's the latest price tag on that estimated to be right now?
There's a preliminary final guaranteed price that the construction company has given us, but it's preliminary because we have deviations, not change order, but we have some deviations, value engineering, and other things that we're looking at.
The Elmore prison price tag has gone from $623 million to $974 million. Hamm says they will have a preliminary final price tag in 6 to 8 weeks. For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
Well, it's hot out there. What meteorologists are calling a heat dome has settled over the South, causing temperatures to soar into the hundreds with heat indices in the 110s. Here's what it's looking like out there. 109 degrees here in Montgomery and the same in Birmingham today, and as high as 112 in Tuscaloosa. This level of heat can be extremely dangerous. Experts are reminding folks to drink a lot of water, take breaks to cool off if you work outdoors, and, of course, never leave a child or a pet unattended in a vehicle. I caught up with Dr. Wes Stubblefield of the Alabama Department of Public Health to ask his advice for beating the heat.
Heat can be dangerous really at any time, and it really has to do with the length of exposure, the age of the individual, and underlying medical conditions. So, but at extreme heat levels, and especially extreme heat indice levels, meaning that, it's hot and humid, it just takes shorter time for those things to happen. So, we want people to be aware of how dangerous heat can be and what they can do to protect themselves and their loved ones. Generally, if you don't feel well and you've been out in the heat, you probably need to get out of the heat. The symptoms you might see in the beginning may be things like muscle cramps, or where you're sweating a lot and you're losing a lot of salt and your muscles start to cramp. That can be an early sign that you're losing a lot of fluid. Then we think about what we call heat exhaustion, and these are medical terms, but so heat cramps, heat exhaustion. Heat exhaustion just means that you feel bad. You can have nausea and vomiting, you can be lightheaded, you can be dizzy, you just don't feel well at all. And then we think about heat stroke, and that's a potentially life-threatening condition where your body loses the ability to regulate heat, and your temperature can spike to levels that are lethal to the human body, above 106, 107, and that requires immediate medical intervention. It's more important that you drink and you fill your tank up before you ever start getting into the heat, because you don't want to go into something where you have half a tank. You want a full tank. And then also frequent breaks. And of course, for people that work in the heat, it's hard, but getting into a cool environment for a while, taking a break is important.
Got to stay cool out there. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Joining me next is State Senator Rodger Smitherman of Birmingham. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, good to be here as always. It's good to see you too.
Well, we're talking redistricting. You're a member of the Reapportionment Committee, and who better to have on there than a constitutional lawyer? We're talking about constitutional issues. But man, it can be complicated, and this one's going to be complicated just because of everything at stake. I mean, a Supreme Court ruling, some pretty unique territory here. But before we get into some of that, I just wanted to ask how you thought today's public hearing went, just in general.
I thought it went well. I thought there was an opportunity for the people who had signed up and who want to be heard today, and to present their thoughts and their feelings and desires to the committee. And I like the way that it was conducted. It wasn't a back and forth exchange or debate or what you want to call it. It was an opportunity for us to receive information, and of course, if they wanted to present any specific issues to us, then present those to us for our consideration as well. So it went well. Mm-hmm. It went well and was very well attended, and they had some good points.
And of course, all these maps have been presented. More than 100, I heard the chairman say. But really, you're talking about, what you heard most about was this remedial plan from the plaintiffs, right? From Evan Milligan and the other co-plaintiffs in the case. That's what most people came to basically support and put their support behind. But let's kind of back up, because we may be getting the cart ahead of the horse here. How does this work? Y'all have got these maps. The committee is supposed to meet and kind of go through them. Walk me through the phases of how reapportionment works.
Well, I'll be glad to. First phase of it, of course, was the court to decide that there was a violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. Once the court decided that, then it's phase 2. And phase 2 now is a remedial portion. How is this going to be corrected? What is the court going to decide on what maps and the layout of those maps and how those maps are put together, and which one of those maps are, whether they feel that they have to draw a map themselves. That was one of the things that you may have heard at the end that was brought out about the different maps. Mm-hmm. Is that, number one, you have a constitutional principle of whole counties, where you have to keep the counties whole as all possible. Do that, keep them whole. And then another aspect is gerrymandering. Mm-hmm. Whether or not you have a little line or a highway or some to go in to touch a certain population for those numbers. They're going to look at whether or not it's gerrymandered. Then they're going to look at the counties that are split. Why are they split? You know, the order came down from the district court, and it was read in part today that says that the counties should not be split to achieve a racial balance. They can be split to achieve one vote, one person's balance. So some of the maps that information it's a fine line. So I mean, but the numbers speak for itself. If you split that county and the portion that you have is for racial purposes, i.e., whether it be to get African Americans or whether it's to get non-African Americans, then the court is saying you basically can't do that. And so all those issues are what's going to have to be taken into account when you come up with the remedy.
So that's sort of the hard part, right? Because, okay, the court has said you need to have, if not majority black districts close to it. So of course that's race, right? But you're not supposed to divide the county by race. That's tough to do. You got to kind of figure that out. That's a tough task, I suppose, for people drawing maps.
Well, it is for some people, but if you look at the maps that we have drawn, all three of our maps take into consideration of whole counties. It's taking into consideration that you don't have gerrymandering, and actually one of them, the maps out of the three that we presented, has a zero deviation. So and that's what you have to have when it comes to.
So the population between districts is the same.
It's the same, identical. Yeah. Yes, and so it can be done. We've shown that it can be done. But it's more than I like this particular map, and because of that, that's the map that I want. These are the elements that you got to apply to any map that you're considering, as well, not just to the map that we've drawn.
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of things because there is a process that works here, but I mean, essentially, it seems to me that this is coming down to the plaintiff's plan versus versus the other plans, the so-called singleton. That's how they're labeled. That do keep counties together and things like that. Is there any sense which way the committee might go? Because you heard just a lot of talk from the plaintiffs today in support of that. Or do you think the committee might go for the other maps?
Well, I think there's always a possibility the committee can go to put their own map together.
Okay.
So that can happen as well. They're not bound. They're not limited to where they can't. The committee itself draw a map to present. I think the criteria though is going to be whether or not it meets those requirements. And it does it in the best manner.
So the committee could basically take several different maps that have, and maybe take different elements from different maps and draw their own.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They could draw their own as well. And but I think that when you look at the legal aspect of things, that has a whole different application than what you feel in your heart. I like something. When you look at what the application of it, one of the things we don't want to do is this. We don't want to send a map up there that's going to be flawed to the point where the courts are going to reject it.
Sure.
And then they're going to apply their own solution to it. That's the one thing we don't want to do.
And that's the risk, right? It's the risk if I assume if the plaintiff's map was passed as is, they're not going to object to that. Somebody else might. You never know what the court might say. But if you pass it, basically any map that you pass, court's going to take a look at it, and they're going to be the ultimate determining body, right? To whether. So walk me through that hypothetical. What happens if the legislature passes a new congressional district map, and that court says it is still in violation? What happens then?
Then the court is going to appoint an independent third party, and they call it a standing master. Then they're going to go in and draw all of the 7 districts for the state of Alabama.
So the legislature wouldn't even play a role in that. It would just all be that
The legislature, the plaintiffs in that case, we have a case before a court, the Singleton and Smitherman. That case, none of that is going to come into play when the standing master is charged with that responsibility of drawing those districts.
I assume that nobody really wants that situation.
No, you don't. And if you look in the call for us to come in from the governor, she talks about Alabama drawing their own map and not having to have the federal government to come in to draw the maps for us. So I think that everybody wants to get it right, but that's what we've got to decide whether or not we're going to embrace this and look at the requirements in which we mentioned, about the whole county gerrymandering, all that aspect of it, and look at what the court has required us to do and operate from there, or are we going to just try to, we being the committee, not everybody on the committee, but the majority of people on the committee, trying to do the minimum requirement to get by, and then hand that to the courts.
Yeah,
thinking the court,
risky.
Yeah, that's risky. That's what I'm saying. We got to get it right this time. We didn't get it right the last time it was wrong, but okay, that's behind us. This time we got to sit down and put politics. Politics is in it, but to put any kind of partisan politics aside and use as the linchpin those orders and the laws on how we should do it and draw that district.
Well, it's fascinating, especially looking at those maps. And I hear what you're saying about counties, because it is kind of frustrating sometimes to not know exactly what congressional district you're in, especially when they change. Everybody knows what county they're in, though.
Yeah, they do.
Right? And
they
so
do.
we put up signs at the line, right? So it'll be interesting. You've got a lot of history here, though. You've been through several redistricting efforts, including that map that got overturned. Was that 2015?
Yes.
It was your lawsuit, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. And I've been involved in presenting maps over the years that have met the requirements that that's been laid out for us to present a map. Once we, last time the committee said that we're gonna have these legislative districts, zero deviation. And I presented really those two maps, and mine was one of them that had zero deviation in it. So it could, I've had blessings. I call it blessings to be the person in this legislature that have had the opportunity to serve on reapportionment more than anybody in the Senate. I've been on from the day I was in the legislature. When I first came, I was fortunate to get on reapportionment at the one that we drew, and not the one I ran on, but the one that we drew. And ever since then, I've had the opportunity to be on it. So I have a little knowledge about this process and about what we're doing.
I've seen your share of maps.
I've seen my share of it and understand them pretty well.
Well, let me ask you about that, because, and I don't want you to get ahead of anything, but this is the congressional districts.
Right.
Y'all also passed two other new maps, new House maps, new Senate maps. Do you foresee those coming under court scrutiny? I know there are lawsuits out there, but do you see potentially the legislature having to come back and redraw those districts?
Well, I think that there are areas where we have the same problems, and I just take where I am, Jefferson County. Jefferson County can within that county, you can have 6 instead of 7 Senate districts. That would create 3 minority and 3 majority districts.
You made that point on the floor. I remember. Yeah.
Yes. And because we have, and I'll say this, and I mean this sincerely, we have 7 good senators, in our district. I really like our local delegation. I do. But in terms of the maps, that's you could actually do that, and there's several other areas of the state that you could do that as well. When you look at the number of people in districts, and you look at the trend of people who vote and how they vote. People nowadays, by and large, become more and more open-minded on just strictly what the candidate has to offer. You had areas that have been introduced so many times being represented Like up in the Coleman area, you know, twice you had African Americans to represent up in that area.
Yeah, James Field.
Yes, so people and the voting trends show that, and so I think that you're going to see that, just like you were saying, opportunity district. You're gonna see more opportunity districts. I think being challenged to where you may see that taking place more in the legislature as well.
Well, we'll be watching that, because I guess the one positive, if under that hypothetical there was a legal challenge, a successful legal challenge, there'd be more time, right? People aren't going to run again until 2026, so it's not that same time crunch.
That's right.
In terms of that. Well, switching gears real quick while I've got you, the legislative session obviously ended a couple of weeks ago, and at the very end, we were looking at bills that passed and didn't pass. And one that didn't pass was this kindergarten bill. Some call it mandatory kindergarten. It's first grade preparedness is I think what Representative Warren called it. You had some opposition to this, and I wondered if you could sort of spell out, what your objections are to that bill, and ultimately why it didn't get across the finish line.
Well, one of the concerns, I had several concerns. One of the concerns was I didn't think that we should be using a test for retention to stop a child that's 6 years old from having the opportunity to start first grade. We're testing young people to see if they can even go to the first grade. That's not what it should be designed for. Number one, first grade should be designed to start the process of preparing students. The second thing is that every child has not and does not have the opportunity to go to what we used to call in the old days kindergarten. They don't have that chance to go, and we don't even have enough K classrooms, preschool as we call it, in all our school systems and in all our schools. But yet we're getting ready to test these children on something we hadn't even prepared them for. We didn't provide the opportunity for them to do it. You know what the result's going to be. If a child, parents haven't been fortunate enough to pay for them to go to kindergarten or to a preschool, then that child haven't had the opportunity to even be exposed. And now we're going to take a child that doesn't have the opportunity to be exposed and give them a test the same. You're going to get the kids a test who had the opportunity to be exposed. And if they flunk the test, they got to not go to first grade, but go back to pre-K instead of first grade, and they 6 years old. That's not right. So my thoughts were, number one, if you're gonna get the children ready, let's get them ready. The only way you can get them ready is have tests to determine what they need in terms of help, not retention, but what they need. And from there, that's where you start preparing a individual plan for that child.
Okay.
Yeah, what they need, and of course, you've got to have revenue. I'm just projecting. I don't know for certain, but I'm projecting we need to start out with $25 million. So we got to build classrooms in many of our schools all over the state. We got to have teaching units.
So I assume they're going to come back with Representative Warren and the governor. I mean, the governor, it was on her agenda, so I assume they're going to come back with this legislation. Are these some of the issues that, would you work with them on some of those things?
Sure.
On if they came back next year?
Oh yeah, I don't have any problem if we get to a point that K-5, it becomes mandatory. That means that we have to provide the resources, and we have to provide transportation for these children. We have to provide tutors. We have to provide coaches to help them and their parents along the way. And so no, I'm all for it, but don't put the cart before the horse. Don't try to look good. Hey, we make sure you gotta be ready, or you can't go to first grade. But yet we know they ain't gonna be ready if they haven't had the opportunity to be prepared. We know what the results gonna be, and that's not right to the children.
Yeah,
that's not right to do them like that.
Yeah, like I said, that'll be probably coming back up next year, so we'll pick up the conversation then. Senator, I've taken too much of your time.
No,
thanks so
right.
much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, my friend.
All right.
Appreciate you.
Always. We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is State Representative Steve Clouse of Ozark. Mr. Clouse, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.
Well, we're talking redistricting. You're on the committee. You've been through this a couple of times. We'll get to that in a minute. But I just wanted to ask you, in general, how you thought the committee meeting went. This is the first public hearing of this effort.
That's correct. I thought it went real well today. Everyone that wanted to speak had a chance to speak, and some of the plaintiffs' attorneys and the plaintiffs themselves that actually filed the suit and went to Washington before the Supreme Court and then before the district court too. They were able to express their opinions, and so I thought it set a good framework to where we've got to go here as we lead up until July 17th when the special session starts.
This is unique because I remember back in 2021 they were all regional, and before that you kind of go around the state and get kind of different public hearings. There's not enough time this time, right? There's a very compressed schedule, so this is really the only public hearing that there will be, correct?
Well, we'll have another one on July 13th.
Oh, okay.
That will also entail some other plans that are starting to come in, and so we'll see what those are, and so we'll have a chance to go over those and have some more public hearings at that point.
I heard Chairman Pringle say today that there were over 100 plans submitted. I mean, that's incredible. So, I mean, are y'all gonna have to go through each of them, or you kind of sift through them as a committee, and maybe staff helps a little bit to sort of categorize them?
Well, staff helps them, but of course they've got particular guidelines that when someone submit one plan, that they've got to do some correct numbers here for us to be able to have our staff be able to put it into the precincts and everything. So some of them will be, won't get to the final drawing there, but because anybody can come up with a computer and make some lines, But yes, we'll be going through all of those that meet the criteria there, and then have our legislative reapportionment committee that will put those numbers into the precincts for everybody to look at.
Well, give me a sense of history here, because how many redistricting efforts have you been a part
Well,
of?
this will be my sixth one now. I know I started in the 90s and 2000, 210, now 220, and then we had to go into special session back in 2017 for the legislative redistricting that got several House seats and several Senate seats that got overturned by the court. So we had to rush into special session then to have them ready by the 2018 elections. So now this will be a situation where we've got to go into special session to get these congressional districts redrawn to be ready for the 2024 elections. And of course, this next year, being a presidential year, the primary will be the first Tuesday in March. So that means qualifying moves up this year. I think the parties are trying to anticipate a November date as far as qualifying, hopefully have those completed by the end of November. So as you can see, the clock's ticking, and we've got to move forward here to have a plan that we can present, and of course it's got to go back to the courts and see if they will accept it.
Right, that's going to be the big question,
Right.
no matter what map passes. Well, you're right, because when it comes to candidate qualifying, first part of doing that is what district are you in?
Right.
What if you're a current congressman or a prospective candidate, you need to know what district you're in. I mean, to be specific, your own congressman could be in a different district come election time. That's a pretty big decision.
Right.
So they need to be done in time.
Could be, but note, not only just Alabama, but all over the United States. Now, congressional districts, you don't necessarily have to live in the district that you run in for Congress.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
You certainly do for legislative seats and other seats, but for Congress, you don't have to live in that district.
It'd be a politically
right. It's not a good thing politically to
Right.
be running in a district that you don't live in, and of course this happened several times before. That's obviously been a campaign issue for those people's opponents.
Sure.
But anyway, it's not mandatory.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Right.
Well, it could, depending on what happens. I remember, going back to that 2008 election. People forget that after that election, Alabama had 3 Democrats and 4 Republicans in Congress. That was there was much more of a general election. Those were competitive general elections.
That's correct.
We might get back to that. It seems like almost any map that gets passed, we're probably going to be back to more districts being competitive in the general. Don't you think?
I would think so,
Yeah.
and I would think they're going to be very active elections every 2 years now,
Yeah.
instead of just sort of being a
Yeah,
foregone
whoever wins the
conclusion.
primary, yeah.
So, it'll make things a lot more interesting on every 2 year basis.
Yep. Well, switching gears, I wanted to talk about the recently completed regular session. It was a big one. Especially if you go back to organizational, special on ARPA, and all of the issues and budgets that y'all tackled. Just in general, what was your impression of the session? Do you think it was mostly a positive?
No, I think it's a very positive session, but of course, obviously, we had a lot of revenue to spend due to the pandemic. Stimulus funds have been coming in the last 3 years, and so it was certainly a positive session, one where we had to deal with the economic development incentives that come due every 5 years. This was the year we had to deal with that. We had that other tranche of ARPA funds that we had to deal with, that we don't have that anymore. So that's something that we won't be dealing with next year, and I think the budgets will be a lot more realistic next year. But we're in pretty good shape, particularly on the education fund. So we'll just have to see how things come down the road.
Yeah. I was talking to Senator Chambliss about his concerns about on the general fund side, saying if we do run into a recession, what those revenues could look like, because like we were talking about before, there are certain sort of fixed costs that maybe we can't control in Alabama.
Well, that's true, particularly on the general fund side, because we have so much related to matching funds that we have to do a certain amount to get the matching funds from the feds, particularly with Medicaid, and then it spills over into some with DHR, mental health, senior services. So there's a lot of things there that we have to make sure we meet the matching funds, and then of course on other agencies like Department of Corrections. It's just we've put a tremendous amount in over the last 4 or 5 years, and we're dealing with that federal lawsuit that's in the process now that will be taking place next year. We don't know what we may possibly face.
Yeah. So it was a historic budget year, lots of money, and everybody's kind of happy. But I'm starting to hear y'all, especially on the general fund side, say, well, let's be careful what we spend because we never know what's happening next year.
That's right.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. We're out of
you.
time, but we'll be following up on this redistricting stuff moving forward.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next is State Senator Jay Hovey from Auburn. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're one of the brand new senators this session.
That's right.
I keep saying that we can't call y'all freshmen anymore. You've been through a very serious and involved session and now have a lot of experience. But I wanted to have you on the show to talk about that experience as a freshman. But I thought we'd start with your election and why you chose to pursue a seat in the state Senate. there in that Auburn area, but it also goes up to Tallapoosa County.
Oh, yeah. No, thanks for having me, for sure. I appreciate what you've done through the years. I've always enjoyed keeping up with what's going on in Montgomery through you, so it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. When we decided to run, my wife and I have been in Auburn, originally from the Auburn, South Lee County area, and so that's sort of it's always been our home, and we've watched it grow and change, and have found opportunity there, both of us, to get plugged into our community and find ways to serve. And so I was currently serving on city council whenever the decision to run for the Senate seat came up, and that was an extremely rewarding opportunity that I really enjoyed and could have continued to serve there, and feel like I was contributing to our society there, specifically in Auburn. Mm-hmm. But this, the Senate seat specifically is pretty unique to me, and I'm sure it a lot of representatives of a larger area like that would have a similar thought. But this Senate District 27 stretches from northern Russell County through the western half or 2/3 of Lee County and almost all of Tallapoosa County as you move south to north through the district. And I joked, and it's not really a joke, but that if you follow that south to north progression through the district, it really kind of follows my life's timeline. I was born and raised in the southernmost point in Lee County, and went to Beauregard High School in just outside Auburn, Opelika, and obviously went to Auburn, married an Auburn high school graduate, and made our home and life in Auburn, and have some family in southern Tallapoosa County. So I thought it was a neat opportunity to serve, not just a broader area and more people, but people that were special to me and people that I grew up with.
Well, you had a unique election. It was about this time last year that we were all following it. We're, of course, in the media, we're trying to cover it, which, the runoff went to one vote, right? This is the
runoff.
It was the primary.
There you go.
The Republican primary between you and the incumbent went to, when all the votes were counted, all the provisional ballots was down to one vote. And there were talks of it's going to come down to a coin toss and all this kind of stuff. Obviously, it got worked out. But talk about what that's like as a candidate and all that uncertainty when it comes to that razor-thin margin.
Well, it was quite a ride, obviously, and I know no one was probably paying attention to that race very much statewide there until the end. But it was quite an adventure. I was admittedly a little bit of an outsider. I was running against a 12-year incumbent, and somebody that had been here for a while, and so what might sound like a good idea and not an easy plan, but you may make your best laid plans there
right
at the kitchen table. It was quite a journey through the entire process. But proud of our little grassroots campaign that fared fairly well, and you never really know, but felt fairly confident that we'd run a good positive campaign, concentrating on Jay and what I could bring to the community, what I'd done in the past, and my life through that district as I described earlier. But you really don't know until it comes down to election day. And so at that primary, I think that night we took an early lead, but as it dwindled down, that night we were 4 ahead, and then so you had to wait a week for provisionals to be counted, and there were plenty of provisionals to count, but instead of that lead getting any bigger, it dwindled to 1. So then we certainly got into some new territory, and I know more about election law and procedure now than I ever intended to, but it was quite eye-opening and really a strengthening moment, through that adversity. I didn't have much professional help. I had no professional help and institutional help during the campaign, and that was a concern during this the legal battle as it wound up being for the contest afterwards. But thankfully, we were able to circle some wagons and get some good help and advice through that process, and the party, culminating in a party hearing in Birmingham. But it all worked out, and certainly learned a lot through the process.
Yeah, it was fascinating to watch. Well, you made it to the state senate, and it's been, like as I mentioned, a pretty busy start. You had the organizational session, you had the ARPA, and we've been talking about how, it's been a lot of work. What's been your impression as a brand new senator to experience the process for this first time, coming in with fresh eyes?
Todd, I really didn't know what to expect or how it was going to go. I, as anyone would expect a freshman to think or approach it, but I intentionally kept an open mind. I joke, had low expectations and of my involvement, and I really didn't have an axe to grind or a pet project that I wanted to push right out of the gate. So it was important just to kind of keep my head down and watch the process, and that was really I'm a process guy. I appreciate what do we do next? What are we doing, and how do you get from point A to point B? And I figured the only way I was really going to get a grasp of that was to watch it unfold in front of me. And I was pleasantly surprised. It didn't take long to sort of get at least a feel for the process, and I didn't know how I'd be received. Coming down here, we were kind of a small freshman class. We had four Republicans, two Democrats, so just 6 new folks in that body of 35. So everyone already had their role, their place, their relationships, and that was probably the biggest concern. And I use that term loosely. It wasn't but the biggest hurdle I wanted to approach was where, how do I get in, how do I fit in, and actually the group, the body as a whole, was very accommodating and receptive, and I was actually very pleased with how easy it was to kind of fall into place and fall into sync.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to watch, how everybody sort of fits into their roles, but I think you're wise to, some people kind of come in with a guns a-blazing and want to change everything. Sometimes it's wise to sit back and observe and get your bearings.
Sure.
So, well, we're out of time, but thanks so much for coming on the show. We look forward to having you back on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Joining me next is political columnist Steve Flowers. Steve, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
Well, I saw you in the committee room when they were going through redistricting, and we caught up on some fun things. But you were talking about, as it comes to redistricting, there's a long history here, and you've been part of that history. Can you kind of walk through some of the highlights that you've experienced on redistricting?
Well, going back even to our 1901 Constitution, our legislative lines were drawn malapportioned under the Constitution. And they weren't necessarily discriminating against African American people, they were discriminating against North Alabama people. For example, when I was a little 12-year-old page, I went on the floor one day, I looked across the chamber, and I knew that Jefferson County was the largest county in the state, and I knew that Huntsville was bigger than Troy, where I came from. Troy had 2 representatives and Huntsville had 2 representatives. We had 28,000 people and 250,000 in Huntsville. That's how bad it was. Lowndes County had 2 senators, and Jefferson County had 2 senators. So we have a history of that.
Agrarian.
What had happened is when they wrote the Constitution, the Black Belt power, which had always existed in Alabama around the Black Belt, they had an inordinate amount of power. They had continually disenfranchised the rural white voters in North Alabama and given them less representation than they deserved. And it happened all the way. It took the Voting Rights Act to say African Americans are being discriminated against, and you've got to give them African American seats before North Alabama got their chance at the table. So, and the first rulings came down in the 1970s. Now get this, Todd. From 1901 to 1970, the legislature had never reapportioned itself.
How about
that? That same discriminatory 2 Huntsville representatives and 2 Troy still existed in the 70s, But the reason it changed was because of African American and the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And the court says, y'all got to draw new lines. If you don't, we're going to do it. And they did it.
I was going to say, because one of the things, if for some reason they don't, this time around, they don't pass what is acceptable to the courts, then a special master is going to draw it, right? But that's happened before. Was it the early 80s?
Well, when I first ran for the legislature, was elected in 1982, the next year, they made us all run again under the new lines. The court drew them. The courts drew the lines, and everybody in the legislature, all 140 of us, had to run for re-election. Now, most of us didn't get opposition because most people thought it was unfair that we were having to run again. But there were some very classic races, like Lowell Barron ran a write-in campaign. Dr. Hubbard had drawn him out of the plan because he had some input with it, and he had drawn some of his enemies out. And Lowell Barron won and won a write-in campaign in '83 for the Senate. But back to they drew our lines. They drew the lines first. A federal judge in New York drew our lines in '70, and then they drew them again in '83. Said y'all still hadn't done it right, so they drew it that way, and they drew the congressional districts at that time too, when not U.W. Clemens, but who was the first person who sat in that African American seat from Earl Hilliard. Earl Hilliard won that seat the first time. They drew that district, and that was the law. And Pringle and them really stayed within the law
As it was. Yeah, we've been talking about this. It's an evolution of jurisprudence as it pertains to the Voting Rights Act. I don't think that's in dispute. But it's going to be different, right? No matter what maps they pass on the congressional, it's going to be much different, maybe more moderate. But talk about that. Talk about the difference between one majority African American district versus two, or even if they're not majority, close to it, and the political dynamics there.
Well, I thought at first, one of the first maps that the plaintiffs drew to the legislature and said, y'all adopt these, they were not perfectly drawn districts. They had Terry Sewell's 7th district at around 49 or 50, and they had the one here in Montgomery at around 44 or something like that. Now, the one they came with the other day, one that Chris England released over the weekend, that one is the one that's going to be enacted. If it's not enacted by the legislature, my belief is, from watching it all these years, that everybody wouldn't be on board. All three plaintiffs, you heard the hearing, all three plaintiffs, Terry Sewell wrote that thing. It
definitely protects her.
It drew a district. So her district, he gave her back Dallas County, gave her back Selma. You know, she's got the most and this it was told that the plan came from Washington. This is the plan the National Democratic Party wants, and quite frankly, it's a pretty plan. It's a pretty decent plan. The people who get messed up is the Wiregrass people.
Well, and so Montgomery would become part of that 2nd district under this plaintiff's plan, potentially protecting her from a political rival down the road. But talk about the 2nd and 1st districts. Under that plan, Coffee County gets drawn in to the 1st district. That's where Barry Moore lives. That's where Congressman Barry Moore lives. Do you think he would run against Jerry Carl? What's your sense on what would happen if those two ended up being in the same district?
He might, but that's been the thing all along. It's been known that if you created a new 2nd district, that Barry Moore's gone. I think Barry Moore's gone. I think his 2nd district, they take those 5 white counties, Houston, Geneva, Dale, Coffee, and Covington, and send them to the Mobile district, and that's Jerry Carl's district. Wiregrass cannot beat a Mobile Baldwin candidate, so that is the Wiregrass people are not going to like having the lack of community of interest that they've all harp about.
It basically cuts it in half.
Yeah. And people like Pringle, when I talked to Pringle about it the first time, he says, well, our Congress is going to have to go through Pensacola to get to Dothan. Well, I said, Pringle, do you think a federal judge in Washington cares where the old congressman has to go? He's looking at a map, and all the white folks in South Alabama look like they belong in a district right here with Mobile and Baldwin. I mean, the fact that y'all been in with Washington County since 1940, that don't hold any weight under the Voting Rights Act. I mean, they want those pine trees in Wilcox and Washington County to go into the new 2nd district. I think the new 2nd district is going to be hard for a Republican to win. I think the bottom line is you're going to have Terry Sewell in District 7, her existing district, and Todd, it is almost identical. It just cleans it up. She's 55 rather than 57.
Right.
She's got a beautiful district. I guarantee you, her handprint is all over this thing. She's got a very pretty district, and it's drawn the most perfect district for a new Democrat who lives in Montgomery primarily. Now, you know, all Montgomery's in that thing.
Right.
So the people who are not going to be happy with the final result are the white Republican voters in East Montgomery and Pike Road and the Wiregrass white Republicans. And they're not going to like it. Now, in defense of the white Republicans and the Wiregrass, at least they're going to have a Republican congressman.
Yeah, and the southern part of the Wiregrass. Well, we're fascinated by it. We're watching to see what happens. They'll be back in a couple more weeks for another public hearing, and then it's the special session. Steve, we're out of time, but thanks so much for coming on and walking us through some of these things.
Thank you, sir.
We'll be right back.
Cheaha Mountain, often called Mount Cheaha, is the highest natural point in Alabama at 2,407 feet above sea level. It is located in north-central Alabama in Cheaha State Park, surrounded by the Talladega National Forest in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This dramatic landscape gets its name from the Creek Indian name for the mountain, Chaha, meaning high place.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with more coverage of Alabama politics right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. Have a happy 4th of July, and we'll see you next time.